They found his journal in the spring thaw, pages frozen solid into a single block of ice. The final entries don't make sense. He writes about being trapped in a single day, about becoming a ghost caught in radio static. But the most terrifying part? The last page wasn't written in his hand. It was a warning from a stranger, a warning about him. This is the story of Finn, the last caretaker of Umbra Outpost, and this is his journal. October 15th. The heart of a place isn't in its timber or its rusted nails, it's in the silence it keeps. And the silence at Umbra Outpost is a cathedral. My arrival was a jarring intrusion of the 21st century into a world that feels permanently lodged in 1953. The helicopter's rotors beat against the air with a brutal rhythm, a frantic modern pulse against the vast, slow stillness of the Alaskan interior. Below, a sea of white and dark green spruce stretched to every horizon, a landscape so immense it felt biblical. Then, a scar in the wilderness, a small collection of dark, snow-dusted cabins huddled together as if for warmth, with a skeletal radio tower looming over them like a forgotten god. Posto Umbra. From the air it looked exactly as it did in the old survey photos, a dead place, but for me, it was anything but. For an archivist, a historian of forgotten things, this was my Tutankhamun's tomb. This was where the logging company's official history went quiet, where a string of disappearances in the 50s were written off as winter incidents. I wasn't here for the caretaker's stipend, I was here for the story. The helicopter touched down in a whirlwind of snow. The pilot, a man named Marcus with a face as weathered as the landscape, didn't even cut the engine. He helped me unload my crates of supplies, canned food, research equipment, books, with an urgency that bordered on panic. "Anya's waiting for you," he shouted over the engine's scream. "She'll show you the ropes. Good luck, Finn. See you in April." He gave me a slap on the back that felt more like a shove, a final push out of the living world and into this snow globe of the past. Standing there, watching the helicopter shrink into a black speck against the pale, indifferent sky, the silence returned. It didn't just fall, it landed. It had weight. It pressed in on me from all sides, a physical presence that filled my lungs and muffled my heartbeat. The air was so cold and clean it felt sharp, like breathing in microscopic shards of glass. And then I saw her. A figure emerged from the largest building, the one I recognized as the mess hall. She was a woman of indeterminate age, wrapped in layers of wool and fur with dark hair braided down her back. Her face was stern, carved by the wind, but her eyes held a profound, almost sorrowful stillness. This was Anya, a local Tlingit woman whose family had apparently served as the de facto link between this place and the outside world for generations. "You're the historian," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was low and calm, a stark contrast to the pilot's frantic energy. "Finn," I introduced myself, extending a gloved hand. She looked at it for a moment before giving it a firm, brief shake. Her grip was strong, her hand calloused. "I am Anya. I will show you the principles." She led me through the camp. The snow crunched under our boots, the only sound in the universe. She pointed out the generator shed, the fuel depot, the well. Her explanations were sparse, technical. She spoke of the place not with fear, but with a kind of solemn, practiced reverence, like a sacristan tending a forgotten chapel. The camp itself was a historian's dream. Old tools lay half buried in the snow, frozen where they'd been dropped 70 years ago. The cabins, their windows dark and vacant, leaned into the wind, their timbers groaning softly. It felt less abandoned and more paused. We ended our tour in the mess hall. It was a single cavernous room, filled with long wooden tables and benches. At the far end, a massive stone fireplace stood cold and imposing. But what drew my eye, what dominated the entire space, was a magnificent grandfather clock. It was nearly 8 feet tall, carved from a dark, rich wood I didn't recognize, its brass pendulum hanging motionless behind a glass door. "This is the heart of the outpost," Anya said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She produced a small leather-bound notebook and a pencil from her coat. The pages were filled with a neat, compact script. "These are the principles of maintenance. They are not superstitions, they are procedures. You follow them, the post remains in balance. You do not, the balance is lost. It is a technical problem." I felt a thrill of academic excitement. This was it, the folklore, the living ritual born from isolation and fear. I nodded seriously, playing the part of the diligent student, my mind already composing the first chapter of my book. She laid out the 4 principles, her voice never wavering from its flat, procedural tone. First, the principle of cadence, she said, gesturing to the grandfather clock. The heart must not stop. You will wind it every morning when you wake, and every evening before you sleep. The key is here. She pointed to a small, ornate brass key hanging from a hook beside the clock. Its ticking is the baseline, the rhythm. Without it, the post drifts. I nodded, my mind immediately providing a rational explanation. The cold. A complex mechanism like this would seize up if not kept in constant motion. A perfectly logical, if quaintly described, procedure. Second, the principle of transmission. She walked me over to a small, partitioned-off room that served as the radio hub. The equipment was ancient, a beautiful mess of bakelite knobs and glowing vacuum tubes. Every day at precisely noon, you will power on the transmitter. You will tune it to frequency 7.3 kilohertz, and you will broadcast 3 minutes of silence. Silence? I asked, intrigued. Not a status report. No, not a call. Silence. It clears the frequency. Think of it as resetting the line. It prevents interference. Another fascinating piece of folklore. Perhaps the frequency was shared with a nearby military installation, and this was their strange, informal way of demanding radio silence. The narrative was building itself. Third, the principle of illumination. She led me to the door and pointed out at the dozen smaller, dilapidated cabins that dotted the camp. At dusk, you will light the lamp in each empty cabin, just one. Keep the wicks low. They must burn until dawn. The darkness should not be total. It makes the structures brittle. Condensation and ice, I reasoned. The minimal heat from a kerosene lamp would be just enough to keep the atmospheric moisture from freezing and cracking the old timber from the inside out. A primitive but clever form of maintenance, anthropomorphized into a fear of the dark. It was perfect. And the last, she said, turning to face me fully. Her dark eyes bored into mine. The most important, the principle of ignorance. Her voice for the first time carried a sliver of something other than detached instruction. It was a sliver of warning. This place is old. The cold here preserves things, sounds, images, echoes. You will see people from a time that is not yours. You will hear things, a voice, an axe, a song. They are resonances trapped in the air, like a recording on a wax cylinder. They are not real. They are not ghosts. They are merely interference. She paused, letting the words sink in. To observe them, to focus on them, to acknowledge them, is to tune them in. It degrades the signal, your signal. For the sake of your own clarity, you must ignore them. You see a figure in the snow, you look away. You hear your name whispered on the wind, you do not listen. You are a caretaker, not an audience, do you understand? I understood completely, though not in the way she meant it. I was witnessing the birth of a ghost story, the psychological coping mechanisms of generations of lonely men, codified into a set of unbreakable rules. The resonances were textbook examples of sensory deprivation-induced hallucinations. The Ganzerfeld effect in the wild. It was academically beautiful. I understand, I said, my voice full of a sincerity she hopefully mistook for obedience. She gave a single, sharp nod. The first supply plane is in 8 weeks. The final pickup is in April. The journal of the last caretaker is under the loose floorboard by the hearth. It might provide context. Her duty done, she turned and walked out of the mess hall without another word. I followed her outside and watched as she climbed onto a snowmobile that was parked half-hidden behind a stack of firewood. With a roar of its engine, she was gone, a dark shape receding into the endless white. And then I was alone. The silence that returned was different this time, deeper. It was no longer a cathedral, it was a tomb. The weight of it was immense. I stood there for a long time, the cold seeping into my bones, feeling the sheer, unadulterated isolation of Posto Umbra. I was the only living, breathing man for at least 100 miles in any direction, a man and a collection of stories. Returning to the mess hall, the chill inside was almost as biting as the air outside. The place smelled of coal dust, old smoke, and something else. Something like ozone, the scent of dormant electricity. My eyes were drawn again to the clock, the heart of the outpost, motionless, silent. My first duty. I took the brass key from its hook. It was heavy, its metal icy to the touch. I opened the small glass door, the hinges creaking in protest. The smell of cedar and old lubricating oil wafted out. I inserted the key into the winding arbor and turned. The sound was shockingly loud. A deep, grinding groan of gears that had been still for months. It sounded like a great beast stirring from a long slumber. I wound it fully, the tension building in the mainspring until the key would turn no more. Then I gently nudged the great brass pendulum. It began to swing, thump. The sound echoed in the cavernous room, a low, resonant beat. Thump. It was slow, deliberate. A heartbeat. Thump. I closed the glass door, but the sound was no longer contained. It filled the hall, pushed against the walls, vibrated up through the floorboards and into the soles of my feet. It was a sound so profound, so fundamental, it felt as if the outpost itself had just drawn its first breath with me as its witness. It was the only sound in the world besides my own breathing, a steady, inexorable rhythm, the bass line. I found the loose floorboard Anya mentioned. Beneath it lay a thick, leather-bound ledger, its pages warped by damp. The cover was embossed with a single faded name, Silas, the journal of the last logger. The context. I placed it on the table, a treasure to be examined later. For now, I sit here, writing my own first entry by the light of a gas lamp. The sun is setting, painting the snow outside in hues of orange and deep purple. The clock keeps its rhythm, a steady companion in the encroaching dark. Anya's principles are laid out on the table next to me, a fascinating piece of living history. Her warnings, her talk of balance and interference are the poetry of solitude. It's a beautiful, haunting place. And the story is just beginning. They told me to ignore the ghosts of the past. But how could a historian ever do that? My job is to listen, to observe, to understand, and I will. They told me to ignore the ghosts of the past. But as a historian, how could I? If you've ever felt that same pull, that temptation to look at the very thing you were warned away from, then leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Because the history of this place was waiting to be heard, and it was about to consume me completely. October 21st. A week has passed since Anya left me in this frozen kingdom. A routine has taken root, a rhythm dictated by the principles and the slow, majestic crawl of the Arctic sun. My life here is monastic, measured, and I find I am uniquely suited for it. The isolation is not a burden. It is a lens, clarifying the world by reducing it to its essentials: cold, light, silence, and work. My days are a ritual. I wake in the frigid darkness of my cabin, the air so cold my breath crystallizes before my eyes. My first act is to cross the crunching snow to the mess hall. Inside, the great clock is always my first stop. Winding its mechanism feels like a sacred duty. The heavy clunk, clunk, clunk of the key, the tightening of the spring, the gentle push of the pendulum. It is the official start of my day, the moment the outpost awakens. With its heartbeat restored, I prepare my breakfast, the hiss of my camp stove a welcome temporary companion. The rest of the morning is dedicated to my own work. I have begun the painstaking process of cataloging the artifacts left behind in the cabins. Each one is a story, a worn-out pipe left on a windowsill, a faded photograph of a woman I'll never know tucked into a wall timber, a set of tally marks carved into a bed frame, counting down the days to a spring that, for one man, never came. At 11:45, I begin the second ritual, the principle of transmission. The radio room is a technological fossil. Powering it up is a process of flicking heavy switches and waiting for the vacuum tubes to glow with a warm orange life. The air hums, smelling of hot dust and ozone. At precisely noon, I tune the dial to the specified frequency and broadcast nothing. 3 minutes of amplified emptiness. It's a strange, meditative act. I imagine this cone of silence radiating out from my tower, passing through unseen mountains and over frozen rivers, a brief, deliberate null point in the ether. The afternoons are for exploration and maintenance. And then, As dusk bleeds across the snow in shades of violet and indigo, the third ritual begins, the principle of illumination. I take my canister of kerosene and a box of matches and make my rounds to the dozen empty cabins. Each one is a unique study in decay. One has a floor half collapsed into the permafrost. Another is filled with snow that has poured in through a hole in its roof. In each I light a single hurricane lamp. I set the wick low so it casts a soft, gentle glow. As I walk back to the mess hall, I can see them behind me, a scattered constellation of faint golden lights against the overwhelming darkness. It is, I admit, a strangely beautiful sight, as if I am the sole resident of a silent, sleeping village. It was on the fourth day that the resonances began. I was in cabin 7, documenting a set of rusted logging saws, when I heard it. The distinct thwack of an axe striking wood, followed by the crisp sound of splitting timber. It was distant, coming from the direction of the thick spruce forest to the east. I froze, every sense on high alert. The sound came again. Thwack! I rationally knew it was impossible. Marcus, the pilot, was my last human contact. The sound was a phantom, an auditory illusion. The cold playing tricks on the air. I remembered Anya's warning, ignore it. And so, with a deliberate force of will, I turned back to my work, my pen scratching loudly in the sudden quiet that followed. In my journal that night I wrote, first auditory resonance recorded. Direction east sound manual timber felling. Possible source, thermal inversion creating acoustic ducting from a source many miles away. Fascinating. 2 days later, the first visual occurred. I was walking back from the generator shed, the sun low and weak. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flicker of movement by the edge of the woods. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a red and black plaid jacket and a dark beanie. He was walking from one cluster of trees to another, his back to me. He was there for no more than a second, a brief impression of color and shape against the snow, and then he was gone. My heart hammered in my chest, a primal flight-or-fight response kicking in before my intellect could catch up. I stopped, staring at the spot. There were no footprints, none. It was exactly as Anya had described, a recording playing on the air itself. My academic curiosity overwhelmed my fear. This was a direct experience of the folklore, a hallucination so vivid, so contextually perfect, it felt utterly real. I did not acknowledge it. I turned my gaze away, walked back to my cabin, and logged the event with a trembling hand. First visual resonance. Subject: male, approx. 6 FT, wearing mid-century logging attire. Duration: 2 seconds. No physical evidence. Note: the psychological impact of isolation is manifesting with remarkable textbook clarity. I was an observer, a scientist cataloging the strange physics of a lonely place. The principles were not for my survival. They were the bizarre local customs I was here to study. I was safe, insulated by my own rational mind. That feeling of safety lasted until yesterday. October 28th. Something is wrong with the time. It began this morning. I woke with a jolt, disoriented. The air in my cabin was utterly, profoundly still. It was a silence so deep it felt like a pressure against my eardrums. It took me a moment to identify what was missing. The clock, the distant rhythmic thump-thump that had become the background radiation of my existence here, was gone. I threw on my parka and boots and rushed over to the mess hall. The vast room was unnervingly quiet. The great timepiece was motionless, its pendulum hanging like a dead weight. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. The heart must not stop. I told myself it was a mechanical failure. A gear had seized in the intense cold. A simple physical problem. I opened the glass door, the silence making the creak of the hinges sound like a gunshot. I wound the key, the mechanism groaning in protest more loudly than ever before. I gave the pendulum a push, and with a familiar thump, the heartbeat returned. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, so potent it left me lightheaded. It was just a machine, after all, a beautiful but flawed machine. I noted the incident in my journal and went about my day, the familiar rhythm a comfort against the memory of that unnerving quiet. But the dissonance had only just begun. At midday, I went to perform the principle of transmission. As I powered on the equipment, I glanced at the clock. It read 9:15. I stopped, frowning. That wasn't right. The sun was high in the sky, and my own digital watch, a reliable chronometer I'd synced with the atomic clock before my departure, read 11:58. The grandfather clock was nearly 3 hours slow. But how? I had reset it and started it myself this morning. It had been running for hours. Time, as measured by this machine, was leaking. It was slipping. A chill, entirely separate from the ambient cold, crawled up my spine. I checked my watch again. 11:59. I performed the transmission, the 3 minutes of broadcast silence feeling charged with a new, anxious energy. When I finished, I returned to the great clock. My watch read 12:04. The clock read 9:19. It was keeping its own time, moving at its own pace, utterly divorced from the reality I occupied. All afternoon, I became obsessed. I checked it every 15 minutes. The disparity grew. By dusk, as I prepared to light the lamps, my watch read 17:30. The clock read sometime just after 1 in the afternoon. It was as if a day inside the mess hall was longer than a day outside of it. The principle of cadence wasn't just about keeping a machine running. It was about anchoring time itself, and the anchor was dragging. Tonight, the resonances are different. They are more frequent, bolder. The sound of the axe is no longer distant. It sounds like it's just outside the walls. I heard, for the first time, a snatch of song. A low, melancholic folk tune being hummed by a male voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. When I was lighting the lamp in cabin 4, I saw the man in the plaid jacket again. This time he was standing at the window of the cabin opposite, looking in. He wasn't a fleeting glimpse. He was solid, real. He watched me for a full 5 seconds before turning and fading, not walking away, but dissolving like smoke into the twilight. I did not acknowledge him. I turned away, my heart pounding, and finished my work. But the connection is undeniable. The temporal anomaly of the clock and the increased intensity of the resonances are linked. The interference Anya spoke of is getting stronger as the baseline of the clock's rhythm becomes unstable. I'm sitting here now, in the mess hall, writing these words. My lamp casts a pool of warm light on the table, a tiny island in a sea of encroaching shadows. The only other light is the faint, cold glow of the aurora borealis, visible through the main window. And across the room stands the clock. Its deep, steady thump, thump is no longer a comfort. It sounds like a lie, a declaration of a reality that is no longer true. Its polished wooden case seems to absorb the lamplight, its brass face gleaming in the dark. It doesn't feel like a machine anymore. It feels like an altar to a forgotten god of time, and I am the unwilling priest who has just realized his rituals are failing. I came here to observe history, but I am beginning to feel like I am being pulled into it, becoming another ghost story for another archivist to find. The thought is paralyzing. What happens when the dissonance becomes too great? What happens when the clock stops not for an hour but for good? Does the post simply drift, as Anya said, or does it drift back to 1953 and take me with it? November the 2nd. It has been 5 days since I last wrote, not for lack of incident, but from a surfeit of it. My journal, once a tool of detached academic observation, has become something else, a lifeline, an anchor. The only place where time seems to flow in a straight, predictable line. Out there beyond the flimsy security of this lamplit table, reality has become pliable. My obsession is the clock. I now log its performance with the feverish precision of a seismologist monitoring a fault line. The temporal decay, as I've started calling it, is not linear. It accelerates. This morning, the great timepiece had lost 7 hours overnight. Yesterday, it was 5. The day inside the mess hall is stretching, thinning, like glass heated to its melting point. The steady thump, thump, has become a mockery, a rhythm completely out of sync with my world. It is the heartbeat of a dying animal, irregular and faint. This temporal variance has had a profound effect on the resonances. They are no longer fleeting apparitions at the edge of my vision. They possess a terrifying new substance, a persistence that actively challenges my attempts to ignore them. I now see the loggers regularly, trudging through the snow in their heavy gear. Their form so solid I can make out the wear on their boots and the frost in their beards. They move with a silent, looping purpose, reenacting forgotten chores. They never look at me. Their gaze is fixed on some point in their own lost timeline, and for that small mercy I am grateful. To be seen by them, I feel, would be an intolerable horror. The principle of ignorance has become a constant, draining act of will. It's like trying not to look at a grisly accident, a constant battle between horrified fascination and the instinct for self-preservation. My peripheral vision has become an enemy territory, a screen onto which these spectral dramas are projected. I keep my eyes down, focused on the task at hand, my world shrinking to the few feet of solid ground directly in front of me. The most significant change, however, has come through the radio. The principle of transmission has transformed from a strange meditative ritual into a daily ordeal. The whispers I heard before have coalesced. When I open the frequency now, I don't just hear static. I hear the outpost as it was. It's a cacophony of spectral sound, a soup of audio history, fragments of conversations sharp and clear for a moment before dissolving into noise. "Get the line secured before this blows in. Sullivan, you hear me?" A panicked voice shouted yesterday, so clearly it was as if he were standing next to me. "I tell you, the foreman's pushing us too hard. Another accident like last week, and the whole camp will walk." A conspiratorial whisper from another broadcast. I've heard snippets of weather reports from the 1950s, crackling advertisements for brands of cigarettes that no longer exist, even the faint, ghostly sound of a harmonica playing a mournful tune. It is a historian's ultimate fantasy and ultimate nightmare. I am being offered a direct, unfiltered feed from the past I came here to study. The temptation to listen, to place my tape recorder by the speaker and capture these impossible voices is almost overwhelming. But Anya's words echo in my mind. To observe is to tune in. It degrades the signal, your signal. So I sit through my 3 minutes of broadcast silence, my knuckles white as I grip the edge of the console, enduring the barrage of voices from the other side, a silent sentinel against a tide of ghosts. But today everything changed. Today a new resonance appeared. And I, in my academic arrogance and my profound human foolishness, broke the final, most important principle. The morning was bleak, the sky a seamless, oppressive sheet of grey. A light, persistent snow was falling, muffling the world in a fresh layer of white. After winding the clock, which had lost a staggering 9 hours, and now felt more like a piece of abstract sculpture than a timekeeping device, I decided to check the fuel levels in the main depot, a task I had been putting off. I was halfway across the compound when I saw him. He was standing near the base of the great skeletal radio tower. It was a child, a boy no older than 7 or 8. He was dressed in clothes from another era, a thick canvas parka with a ruff of wolverine fur framing his small face, and heavy, oversized leather boots. He wasn't moving. He was perfectly still, his head tilted upwards as if listening to something from the tower itself. His small figure, a stark, dark shape against the falling snow. My first reaction was a jolt of pure, adrenaline-fueled shock. This was new. All the other resonances had been men, loggers, people who belonged here. A child did not. My second reaction was a wave of overwhelming analytical curiosity. This was a significant deviation, a new variable. He seemed different from the others. He wasn't trapped in a repetitive loop of action. He was just present, static, observant. He felt more real, more conscious than the phantom lumberjacks. He lowered his head, and for the first time, a resonance seemed to register the landscape. His gaze swept across the compound before settling on my cabin. He was looking at my world. I should have looked away. I should have turned my back, marched to the fuel depot, and ruthlessly purged the image from my mind. The principle was clear, but I couldn't. My feet were rooted to the spot. My role as historian, as observer, took over. This was a primary source of unparalleled significance. But there was something else, too. A deeply human pull. He looked so small, so lost in the vast, unforgiving emptiness. He turned his head slowly and his gaze met mine. There was no flicker, no transparent, ghostly quality. His eyes, dark and serious, locked with my own from 50 yards away. The world seemed to contract to the space between us. In that moment he was not a resonance. He was a boy alone in the snow, and my mind, in its desperate attempt to rationalize, to control the situation, committed the fatal error. It's a hallucination, I told myself, my heart hammering against my ribs, a remarkably vivid projection of my own psyche, triggered by stress and isolation. It's not real. It's a figment of my imagination. And if it's not real, I reasoned with the flawless, idiotic logic of a man on the edge of a cliff, then what harm can it do? What harm is there in acknowledging a shadow? What is the procedural difference between ignoring a ghost and placating one? It was my humanity that betrayed me. It was the instinct to offer comfort to a child who looked lost and alone, even a phantom one. I wanted to communicate just for a second that he was seen, that he wasn't alone. I lifted my head. I met his gaze without flinching, and I gave him a single, slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, a greeting. I see you. The reaction was not gradual. It was absolute, instantaneous. The very instant my chin completed its downward motion, the world broke. It was not a sound. It was the cessation of all sound. The wind, which had been whispering and driving the snow sideways, vanished. The snow itself stopped falling, the flakes hanging suspended in the air like a photograph. The gentle, ever-present groan of the mess hall's old timbers went silent. The faint, distant hum of the generator died. Even the sound of my own frantic heartbeat in my ears disappeared. A perfect, profound, and impossible vacuum. The light flattened, losing all its depth. Shadows became hard, painted on things. The entire world, from the snow at my feet to the grey sky above, looked like a matte painting, a diorama. The boy did not fade or dissolve. He was simply gone. One moment he was there, a solid presence by the tower. The next, there was only a patch of smooth, undisturbed snow where he had stood. His absence was a hole punched in reality. I stood frozen, not from the cold, but from a terror so pure and elemental, it felt like my soul was turning to ice. I tried to take a breath and found the air thick and unmoving in my lungs, like trying to breathe water. I was trapped, a fly in amber. After a timeless moment, a single sound returned, a sharp crack from the direction of the mess hall. It was the sound of a mainspring under immense tension, finally snapping. Then slowly, agonizingly, the world seeped back in. The wind returned with a low moan. The snow began to fall again. My heart began to pound in my ears, a frantic, terrified drum. I could move. I stumbled backwards, my legs shaking violently, and ran, a clumsy, panicked flight back to my cabin, slamming the door and bolting it behind me. I am writing this now, my hand shaking so badly the words are nearly illegible. I have broken the principle. I have looked into the abyss and I have acknowledged what I saw there. Anya's warning was not a metaphor. I have tuned in the interference. I have engaged with the recording. And in doing so, I have done more than just see a ghost. I think I just broke the machine. I broke the heart of Posta Umbra. The air outside my window no longer feels like the present. It feels like a memory, and I have the horrifying suspicion that I am now trapped inside it with them. November 3rd, Attempt 1. Sleep did not come last night. How could it? I spent the hours huddled in my sleeping bag, a prisoner in my own cabin, listening. The world outside had changed. The silence that followed my interaction with the boy eventually gave way to the familiar sounds of the wilderness. But they were wrong, distorted. The wind howled with a new, guttural voice. The familiar groans of the camp's old structures sounded less like settling timber and more like the sighs of sleeping giants. Every shadow seemed to writhe with a life it did not possess before. The boundary between what was real and what was resonance had been irrevocably breached. I must have eventually succumbed to an exhausted, dreamless stupor because I awoke with a start to the grey pre-dawn light filtering through my frosted window. My first conscious thought was of the clock. The snapping sound I'd heard, the mainspring. The heart had not just stopped, it had broken, A profound funereal stillness hung over the camp as I made my way to the mess hall. The door creaked open into a room that felt colder and darker than ever before, and there it was. The great-grandfather clock stood silent, its pendulum hanging utterly motionless. I didn't need to check the key. I knew it was futile. The heart was dead. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my sanity. The post drifts. What did that mean? Was I now unmoored, cast adrift in this sea of snow and haunted history? My mission, my academic curiosity, had evaporated, replaced by a single primal imperative: survive. I had to fix this. Perhaps Anya or Marcus had a contingency plan for a caretaker going silent. I had to get to the radio. My hands trembled as I powered up the ancient equipment. The vacuum tubes flickered to life, their orange glow the only warmth in the room. I bypassed the usual noontime frequency, instead tuning the dial to the emergency channel Marcus had shown me. I keyed the microphone. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Finn, caretaker at Umbra Outpost. Do you copy?" "Over." Only static answered. A harsh, grating hiss. I tried again, my voice rising in pitch. "Mayday, this is Umbra Outpost. Can anyone hear me? The primary mechanism has failed. I repeat, the clock is broken. Over." The static hissed back at me, but this time something lay beneath it. A voice. Faint, distorted, swimming in the noise. It sounded like a woman's voice, cooing a lullaby. It was a melody I didn't recognize, ancient and unsettling. It was a resonance, bleeding through the very frequency meant to be my connection to the outside world. They were in the machine now. A cold sweat broke out on my brow. I tried every channel, scanning the entire band, but the result was the same. Static, layered over with the ghostly whispers and phantom sounds of the outpost's past. The radio was no longer a tool for communication. It had become a speaker for the dead. My link to the 21st century was severed. Defeated, I slumped into a chair, my head in my hands. The silence of the room was absolute, broken only by my own ragged breathing. I glanced at my digital watch for some semblance of order, some proof that the world I knew still existed. The display read 8:17 a.m. November 3rd. I needed to document this, to maintain the routine. The journal was the only thing that still made sense. I pulled it from my pack, uncapped my pen, and wrote the date at the top of a fresh page. And then I froze. I had already written today's date. My blood ran cold. I flipped back a single page. There it was at the top of the previous entry, in my own handwriting, November 3rd, attempt 1. The very entry I was writing now. But that was impossible. I hadn't written in my journal since before I saw the boy, which was yesterday. Yesterday was November 2nd. My hands shaking, I dug into my rucksack for my satellite phone, a device I'd brought as a last resort backup. I'd saved its battery, never turning it on. I powered it up, my heart hammering as the screen flickered to life, searching for a signal. It found one, a single, weak bar. But that wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking for the date. Displayed in crisp digital lettering at the top of the screen were the words, Tuesday, November 2nd. No, it couldn't be. My watch said the 3rd. My memory screamed that a night had passed. But the sat phone, an objective external verifier of reality, disagreed. And my own journal entry seemed to suggest a horrifying, impossible truth. I was not in tomorrow. I was still in yesterday. A frantic, desperate energy seized me. This was a mistake, a glitch. My watch was wrong. My memory was fogged by stress. I had to prove it. I had to live the day and see it turn into the next. I would force time forward through sheer force of will. I burst out of the mess hall and began my day's work with a feverish intensity. I would reenact my routine from yesterday, but this time I would not make the same mistake. I checked the fuel depot, my eyes screwed tightly to the path in front of me, refusing to even glance toward the radio tower. I performed my cataloging work, focusing on the grain of the wood, the texture of the rust, anything to keep my mind locked in the present moment. But the world resisted. The quality of the light was unnervingly familiar. The patterns of the frost on the windows were identical to the ones I'd noted yesterday. The resonances were playing out their spectral pantomime in the exact same sequence. I heard the phantom axe fall at the exact same moment. I saw the same logger in the plaid jacket cross the same path at the same time. It was a play, and I was the only audience member who remembered the last performance. The worst moment came as I was returning to my cabin for lunch. I saw him, the boy. He was standing in the same spot by the radio tower, in the same pose, looking up at the sky. This was the moment of decision, the nexus point. My heart seized in my chest. "Ignore him," I screamed at myself. "It's the only way." I averted my gaze so violently I nearly fell. I stared at the ground, focusing on the pattern of my own boots in the snow, and walked. I did not look up. I did not slow down. I reached my cabin, my entire body trembling with the effort of that simple act of non-acknowledgement. I spent the rest of the day in a state of hyper-vigilant paranoia. I did not leave my cabin again. As dusk fell, I did not perform the principle of illumination. Let the darkness take the empty cabins, let them become brittle. My only goal was to reach the finish line. Midnight. To see the date on my watch and the sat phone click over to November 3rd. The hours crawled by. Night fell, deeper and more menacing than ever before. I sat in the dark, watching the slow progress of the numbers on my watch. 21 Mao, 22, 2, 23 Mao. At 23:59, I held my breath. The final minute felt like an eternity. 57, 58, 59, 00. The date on my watch changed. Wednesday, November 3rd. A sob of relief escaped my lips. I had done it. I had broken the cycle. Exhausted but triumphant, I finally allowed myself to collapse into my sleeping bag. I awoke with a start to the grey pre-dawn light filtering through my frosted window. My first conscious thought was of the clock. A strange sense of déjà vu washed over me. The air was utterly, profoundly still. It took me a moment to identify what was missing. The silence, the great timepiece. The heart had stopped. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, a horrifying, sickening dread coiling in my gut. I threw on my parka and rushed to the mess hall. It was exactly as I had seen it before. The clock was silent and motionless. My satellite phone was on the table where I'd left it. I snatched it up, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The screen illuminated. Tuesday, November 2nd. The world tilted on its axis. The relief I had felt hours before curdled into pure, unadulterated horror. I had not broken the loop. I had merely completed it. The day had reset, taking my victory with it, wiping the slate clean for everyone and everything but me. I was the only variable, the only one who remembered. The title of the journal I'd found, Silas's journal, flashed in my mind. A Winter That Never Ends. I had thought it was a metaphor for the long, dark season of the soul. I was wrong. It was literal. I was not trapped in a season. I was trapped in a single broken day. My personal repeating hell. The winter that would never, ever end, because tomorrow would never come. My journal is my only proof. Every morning the day resets, but the ink I put on the page remains. The physical evidence of my looping consciousness. I'm writing this now for the second time. Or is it the third, the 10th? I am already losing track. I will hide this journal, and I will start a new one tomorrow. Which is today. Which was yesterday. A message in a bottle thrown into a static ocean of time. November 2nd. Attempt. I've lost count. Time is no longer a river. It is a cage. A circular, featureless cage, and I am the hamster running on the wheel, convinced that one more step, one more desperate scramble will lead to an exit that doesn't exist. How many times have I lived this day? 20, 30. The tally marks I've started carving into the leg of my bunk are the only calendar I have left. Each fresh scar in the wood is a testament to another failed dawn, another sunrise that brings not a new day, but the same one, meticulously reset. My journal has become a palimpsest of despair. Each morning I find the previous day's entry exactly as I wrote it, a ghost of my own recent past mocking my imprisonment. I read my own words describing discoveries I have yet to make again, warnings I have yet to heed again. I have tried everything to break the cycle. Every variable, every permutation of action, has been tested with the frantic energy of a condemned man trying to pick the lock on his own cell. I have followed the principles with a monk's devotion. I have desecrated them with a vandal's rage. I have spent the entire 24-hour period locked in my cabin, refusing to participate. I have spent it running through the snow, screaming into the indifferent wind until my throat was raw. I've tried to break the clock before it could break itself, smashing its glass with a fire poker, only to find it pristine and whole the next morning. I have tried to leave, packing a bag and marching into the endless white of the wilderness, only to find myself waking up in my bunk, the journey erased, my boots inexplicably clean by the door. The outpost will not let me go. The day will not let me go. My own memory has become a minefield. At first, the perfect recall of the repeating day was a tool. I knew where the floorboards creaked. I knew when the wind would gust. I knew the precise moment the phantom logger would appear at the tree line. Now this foreknowledge is a form of exquisite psychological torture. The lack of novelty, of surprise, is grinding my sanity down into a fine grey powder. My mind has started to fray at the edges, my own thoughts becoming as cyclical and repetitive as the day itself. I find myself humming the ghostly harmonica tune I hear on the radio. I catch myself using phrases from the spectral conversations of the loggers. Their reality is bleeding into mine. But something has changed. The loop is no longer stable. My continued presence, my consciousness churning within this static moment, is having an effect. It is like a rock dropped into a still pond. The ripples are spreading and the reflections are starting to warp. The resonances are changing. They are becoming aware. It began subtly. A few loops ago, as I was walking past the mess hall, one of the phantom loggers, a tall man with a thick, dark beard who is always tasked with carrying a cross-cut saw, stopped. He was in the middle of his preordained path, a path I had seen him walk 100 times, but he stopped, turned his head and looked directly at me. His eyes, which had always been vacant and unfocused, were sharp. For a heartbeat, there was a flicker of something in them. Recognition. Confusion. Then, as if a switch was flipped, his gaze went blank again and he continued on his way as if nothing had happened. Since then, these moments of contact have become more frequent, more deliberate. They are no longer simple recordings. My act of acknowledging the boy seems to have given them all a sliver of consciousness, a crack in their programming, through which they can now perceive me. The woman's lullaby I hear on the radio now sometimes weaves my name into its melody. Hush now, little Finn, the snow is falling down. It is a violation of the deepest kind, turning a phantom echo into a personal tormentor. The man in the plaid jacket no longer simply fades away. He lingers at the edge of my vision, watching me. He doesn't approach, he doesn't threaten. He just observes, a silent, plaid-clad sentinel of my personal hell. His persistence is terrifying. He is no longer an echo of the past. He has become a feature of my present, my own, personal ghost. But the most terrifying evolution has been in the boy. He is the alpha resonance, the nexus. My breaking of the fourth principle made him the focal point of this temporal fracture. For many loops I successfully, painfully ignored him. I would avert my gaze, lock myself away, do anything to avoid that pivotal moment by the radio tower. But the loop is corrosive. It wears you down. One day, out of sheer soul-crushing exhaustion, I faltered. I looked. He was there, as always. But this time when our eyes met, he smiled. It was a small, slow, knowing smile. It was not the innocent smile of a child. It was ancient. It was the smile of a trap that has been sprung. He raised a small mittened hand and gave me a little wave. In that single, simple gesture, the entire dynamic of my imprisonment shifted. I was no longer an unseen observer of his loop. He was a conscious warden of mine. Now he is everywhere. He is no longer confined to his spot by the tower. I will glance up at the window of my cabin and see his small face peeking in before vanishing. I will open the door to the mess hall and see him standing at the far end of the room by the cold fireplace for just a second before he disappears. He leaves no footprints. He makes no sound. He is simply there, a constant, silent reminder of my transgression. He has started to communicate, not with words, but with objects. A few loops ago, I entered my cabin to find a single, perfect raven's feather lying on my pillow. I had seen no raven that day. The day before, it had not been there. Yesterday, which is today, which is always, I found a small, smooth white stone placed directly on top of my journal. A marker, a message. From whom, and to what end, I cannot fathom. Is it a gift, a warning, a clue, or is it merely the idle play of a bored deity? My psychological state is deteriorating rapidly. I am no longer sure what is a memory from a previous loop and what is happening in this one. The lines have blurred. I have started having conversations with myself, debating strategies, whispering encouragement. The silence here is so absolute that the sound of my own voice is a comfort, a proof that I still exist. I found Silas's journal again. I have read it a dozen times now, but in my current state, his words have taken on a new, horrifying clarity. His final entries are not the ravings of a man going mad from isolation. They are the lucid, terrified observations of a man trapped in the same cage I am in. The boy asked for my name today, Silas wrote in one of his last entries. I didn't answer, but he knew it anyway. He wrote it in the frost on the window. That single sentence chilled me to the bone. The boy is learning. He is growing stronger with each turn of the wheel, feeding on my consciousness, my despair. What began as a temporal anomaly, a glitch in the physics of a haunted place, has become something predatory. It is an intelligence. It is studying me. I have come to a new, terrible conclusion. I am not merely trapped in this loop. I am the fuel that powers it. My awareness, my memory of the previous cycles, is the energy source that allows the broken day to reset. As long as I am here, conscious and remembering, the winter will never end. The record will keep skipping on the same terrible groove. Therefore, the only logical path to breaking the cycle is to remove the fuel. This realization has brought with it a strange, terrifying calm. There are two ways to erase a memory. One is to escape its source. The outpost has made it clear that is not an option. The other is to erase the mind that holds it. I am not a suicidal man. I came here to find stories, not to end my own. But the logic is inescapable. If my consciousness is the linchpin, then I must find a way to silence it. Perhaps not forever, but maybe just for one rotation. What would happen if I were unconscious at the moment the day resets? If there were no memory to carry over, would the loop finally shatter? Would time, starved of its paradox, be forced to move forward? It is the most dangerous gamble of my life. A desperate, unscientific leap of faith into the very mechanics of my prison. Tonight, I will try. There is a small emergency medical kit in the mess hall. It contains a bottle of potent prescription-grade sleeping pills meant for serious injuries. I will take them all. I will force myself into a sleep so deep that no memory can survive the transition. Either I will wake up tomorrow on November 3rd, a free man in a world that moves forward, or I will not wake up at all. Given the alternative, an eternity of this, both outcomes have started to look like a form of salvation. November the 2nd, final attempt. The decision once made settled in my soul with the cold, dense weight of a gravestone. There was no more panic, no more frantic scribbling of theories in my journal. The hamster had finally stopped running on its wheel, not out of hope, but out of a profound, terminal exhaustion. There was only the plan, a single, desperate equation I had to see through to its conclusion. I sit here in the great mess hall. It is deep night. Outside, the aurora borealis is a silent, ghostly fire in the sky, its cold light filtering through the grime-streaked windows. It illuminates the cavernous room in a shifting, ethereal glow, making the long tables look like pews in a ruined church. My only other light is the sputtering flame of a single kerosene lamp, casting my shadow, long and distorted, against the wall behind me. And across the room, a hulking shape of darkness, stands the silent clock, the broken heart. In front of me on the table lies the outpost's medical kit. It is a small metal box, rusted at the hinges. Inside, nestled amongst rolls of sterile gauze and vials of iodine, is a small brown glass bottle. The label is faded, but the words are still legible: phenobarbital. The font of ink beneath it, from a doctor's pen 70 years dead, warns, "Take only as directed. Do not exceed dosage. There are perhaps 30 pills inside. I will exceed the dosage." This is not an act of self-destruction. I must be clear on that, if only to myself. It is an act of sabotage, an attempt to throw a wrench into the very gears of this temporal prison. If my consciousness is the engine, then tonight I will flood that engine. I will force a system error. I will become a variable so broken, so absent, that the program will have no choice but to crash. My hands are steady as I unscrew the cap. The pills are small and white, almost chalky. I pour them into my palm, a small mound of potential oblivion. They feel alien, a piece of modern chemistry in a place governed by ancient, unknowable laws. I think of the boy, of his knowing smile. This is my answer to him. You cannot trap what is not there. I take a final look around the mess hall, this room that has been my world, my sanctuary, and my cell. I see the ghosts of the loggers at their tables, their phantom forms shimmering in the auroral light. They are laughing, drinking, their spectral voices a silent chorus. They are the past, I am the present. I am doing this so that there might once again be a future. I raise my hand to my mouth. The pills taste of bitter dust. I wash them down with gulps of icy water from my canteen, the cold liquid a shock to my system. I swallow once, twice, until they are all gone. For a long time, nothing happens. There is only the silence, the faint whisper of the lamp, and the slow, inexorable crawl of the minutes on my digital watch. I sit, and I wait for the chemical tide to rise. It begins as a pleasant warmth spreading through my limbs, a loosening of the knot of perpetual terror in my chest. The edges of the room begin to soften, the sharp lines of the tables and chairs blurring slightly. The aurora outside seems to brighten, its colors deepening from a pale green to a vibrant, impossible emerald. My head grows heavy. The act of holding it upright becomes a conscious, difficult effort. I feel myself not falling asleep, but untethering. It is a sensation of drifting, of my own awareness becoming a loose thread, slowly unraveling from the tapestry of my body. I am not falling downwards into slumber. I feel as if I am falling upwards, into the vast, silent static of this place. The sounds of the resonances return, not as whispers, but as a symphony. I can hear every conversation from every point in the outpost's history, all at once. The roar of the old saws, the shouting of the foreman, the mournful harmonica, the lullaby. It all blends into a single, overwhelming wave of sound. The room dissolves. The lamp, the tables, the clock, they all fade into a shimmering visual noise. I'm no longer in the mess hall. I am nowhere. I am inside the interference. And then he is there. The boy. He stands before me in the swirling vortex of light and sound. He is not a resonance. He is solid. He is the calm eye at the center of the hurricane. He is not smiling. His expression is one of serene, ancient patience. "You were so close," a voice says. It is not the voice of a child. It is a chorus of voices, men, women, the wind, the cracking of ice, the ticking of 100 clocks, all speaking as one. The voice does not enter my ears. It blooms directly in the center of my mind. "What is this?" I manage to ask, my own voice a distant echo. "What do you want?" "Balance," the boy's voice replies, simple and absolute. "The principle of cadence." The post is a mechanism. It requires a heart to give it a rhythm, a constant. Silas was the heart for a long time, but he grew dissonant. He broke the principle of ignorance. He looked too long. He tried to speak to us. He unbalanced the mechanism. The static around us coalesces, and I see images. I see Silas older, more terrified than I ever imagined, talking to the boy, pleading with him. I see him trying to smash the radio, trying to burn the mess hall down. I see his final, desperate act, breaking the fourth rule, not by ignorance, but by defiance, staring into a resonance until he himself became one. A ghost absorbed into the system he could not defeat. "The mechanism requires a conscious anchor," the voice continues. "A guardian. When the old one failed, the day of its failure was preserved, frozen, a single moment, held in stasis, awaiting a replacement. It looped, calling for a new awareness. It called for you. So, the loop. It was a test, I ask, the horror of the revelation dawning. A job interview. An acclimation, the boy corrects me gently. To see if your consciousness was stable enough to be integrated. Your attempts to break the loop were the final part of the process. You showed resilience. You showed ingenuity. You showed the strength required to maintain the cadence. I tried to erase myself, I spit, a phantom, useless anger rising within me. I took the pills. I'm checking out. For the first time, the faintest hint of a smile touches the boy's lips. It is a look of profound, cosmic pity. You misunderstand the procedure. You cannot erase the signal. You can only change its frequency. By taking the pills, you did not disconnect your consciousness. You merely loosened it from its temporary physical anchor. You made it pliable, ready for the transfer. You have not ended the cycle, Finn. You have completed it. You have accepted the position. The vortex of light and sound rushes in. I feel a sensation of being woven into something vast and intricate, my own thoughts and memories becoming a single, bright thread in an infinite, complex pattern. I see the history of the outpost not as a historian, but as a participant. I feel the cold of 1,000 winters. I hear the hopes and fears of every man who ever lived and died here. I understand the principles not as rules, but as fundamental laws of this small pocket universe. And then I feel a great, rhythmic thump, a heartbeat, strong, steady, mine. The sound of helicopter rotors slices through the stillness. I open my eyes. I'm standing in the doorway of the mess hall. The sun is blindingly bright, reflecting off a world of pristine white snow. It is warm. Birds are singing in the spruce trees. It is spring. The sense of dislocation is absolute. My body feels both intimately familiar and like a borrowed suit of clothes. I raise a hand and look at it. It is my hand, but it feels distant. I am looking at it from a great height. The helicopter lands. The side door slides open and a woman climbs out. It is Anya. She looks exactly the same, her face a mask of solemn respect. Behind her, a young man jumps to the ground. He is in his late 20s with an eager, optimistic face, his eyes wide with the thrill of adventure. He looks at the outpost with the same academic excitement I once felt. He is the new me. Anya approaches, her gaze meeting mine. There is a flicker of something in her eyes, pity perhaps, or recognition. She knows what I have become. The balance is restored, she says, her voice low. The cadence is strong. I find myself nodding, though I did not consciously decide to. The words come out of my mouth, my voice sounding strange, resonant like a chord rather than a single note. The winter is over. She hands me a thick, leather-bound ledger, my journal. I take it. It feels light, insignificant. The story of a man I used to be. The new caretaker approaches us, a friendly, naive smile on his face. "Wow," he says, his breath fogging in the crisp spring air. "This place is incredible. It's like stepping back in time." I look at him. I see his future playing out before me. The fascination, the discovery, the dawning horror, the desperation, the final, inevitable acceptance. He is the next candidate, the next potential heart. My replacement, should I ever falter. I open the journal to its last written page, my final, frantic entry about the sleeping pills. My testament is complete. But the story requires a postscript. It requires a new principle, a warning that is also an invitation, a key to the next lock. I take the pen from my pocket. My hand, now steady and sure, moves across the blank space at the bottom of the page. My handwriting is different now, sharper, more precise. I write, a new principle. The fifth, do not listen to the radio at midday. There is a man trapped in the static. He sounds like a historian. He is the heart of this place. Do not tune to his frequency. To acknowledge him is to answer his call. I close the ledger and hand it to the new caretaker. This might provide context, I say, the words tasting like ash and eternity on my tongue. I have become Silas. I have become the ghost in the machine. The winter of the looping day has ended, but my own winter, the long, static, unending winter of my consciousness has just begun. I am the guardian, I am the cadence, and I will stand my post forever, waiting for the next heart to fail.